Hi, so today I'm going to do a fairly introductory basic tutorial on Substance Painter. I know 2.0 or whatever just came out for Substance Painter, however that does have an upgrade fee, so I'm sticking to 1.6 as you can see up here. And yeah, so I'm just going to go into some hard surface modeling and texturing with that. So, Substance Painter as a program isn't as great for more organic, non-style or like stylized things. So, like hand painted textures aren't the greatest. So it's generally a more procedural driven hard surface program. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on. So let's open up this model here. Just gonna do a basic gun hard surface thing. As you can see, this one's already textured. It was just a quick basic texture. Yeah, so nothing too fancy. I'm just gonna delete it all over here and then go over. So first of all, just deleting all the maps right now. So the first thing generally when you import your model into Substance, you just take an OBJ or an FBX or whatever and load it up. I've already done that to save time. So then the next thing you generally want to do is a lot of the cool particle and physics sim brushes that come with Substance Painter and that look really cool if used properly are sometimes they just won't work straight out of the bag. Like, let's see if, no, they seem to be working. This is probably because I've already baked this in before, but anyway. So just take my word that sometimes the procedural physics stuff don't always work out. So generally what you're going to want to do is bake these maps, and I've actually found that the Substance Painter baking method is actually pretty solid compared to other methods such as baking it out in Maya. Yeah, so I tend to, if I don't have a high poly, for example, this one I do not, I've just taken the base mesh that I made in Maya. It's, what is it, around like, I want to say it's 600 polys. So this is a really low poly acid. Actually, this one might be 1,000 or so, but it's still just a really low poly asset. Anyway, you can see a lot of the normals are flipped because this is where external objects would be placed. For example, this would be like a magazine clip down here, so the player would actually never see that area, and this also has another object inside of it. So yeah, just saving that on texture mapping. Okay, so let's bake in a normal, and because this one has no high poly, we're just going to take the original object and bake that in. And while that doesn't actually do much, like it will generate just a bunch of fake normal mapping and all this stuff, it just lets Substance Painter work a lot better because it will create that curve map, the normal map, the just everything that Substance is going to want to play with. You can see on the side it even does like an AO bake, but that one doesn't really work, as you can see, if there's no high poly. But so anyway, that's just for Substance Painter's sake that we're doing that right now. And then okay, let's get started texturing. So how Substance Painter works is it is a layer-based program, so it's fairly similar to Photoshop in that sense. And you're going to want to start having a base layer. This is just generally the thing that will be the bottom. So generally for hard surface objects like this, I like to do a nice like steel texture, and you can just drag and drop that in. I do not know why the model is pure black right now. That's weird. apparently the normal map was messed up. Anyway, so that doesn't really matter. We can just delete that one. And yeah, so you may have seen me switch views earlier. Let's just hit F1, shows both the UV and the 3D view side by side. F2 is the 3D, F3 is the 2D, so I'll just be switching back and forth between those. So yeah, I like to start off with a nice base steel, try to drop it to a more flatter black, and then turn down the reflection a bit. And that's one of the really cool things about Substance Painter, is that all of this will just keep modifying the material. So let's say I do want it really shiny, well I can just push that back up and now you can see it's super shiny. Or if we want to say, like, let's make the base blue or red or apparently hot magenta, it doesn't really matter. We can just tweak this on the fly and it takes seconds to do. It's super handy. That's why I prefer this over Photoshop, because it's a lot more reactive and instant feedback kind of thing. So now that we have the metal down, actually want to make it a bit more reflective so it reads better as metal. We're going to want to make sure we have all the channels turned on, which is correct. So to go into the different material channels real quick, the default ones for an object, because it's a PBR render, is color, height, rough, and metal. So what color is basically a diffuse. It's just the color of it. If I shut that off, you'll see it instantly loses the black, but none of the roughness or shininess. And yeah. And then the height is essentially just what modifies the normal map. So this one doesn't actually have anything on the layer because it is a default material without any bump or surface texture, but if I'm just going to add a really quick one to show off what it's doing. Let's say we drop in this concrete bear one. So you can see it kind of raises and lowers the normal map a bit. If we open this up, we can turn on height and just, yeah, so we can see the difference, hopefully. So yeah, if we just pump up height a lot, this is actually a bad material. If we do a painted steel layer, let's do car paint though, actually it'd be a really good demo. So as you can see, this one has the height. It's pretty bumpy. You can see, you know, it looks like just noise thrown over the raise and lowering. So if we take away the height, it instantly flattens out. Roughness is essentially how the height will affect the reflectivity. So you can see, like, there's a lot of hot spotting right in this area, whereas if we turn that off, it'll be a lot more diffuse and evenly distribute the light. And then metal is generally just how the reflection and how reflective it is. So anyway, that's your 4 basic channels. I'm going to be playing with those as I add things. For example, let's say I want to make this button here a red. So if we add an extra layer, we can turn off height, roughness, and metal, and we're gonna just only leave the color and go down here to our parameters. We're gonna switch this to red. It is inheriting the previous layers attributes because these are turned off, so they won't overwrite it, and right now we have a blend of 100, so it's just gonna, you know, take those attributes. So basically we want to isolate out this button right now. And the easiest way of doing that is we could hand paint it, but as Substance works similar to other texturing programs, if I started trying to paint it, um, I might have problems just isolating it to there and it might spill over. So generally what I like to do is go into the UV view and then try to find where that button is. And an easy way of doing that is selecting it via the polygon selection brush. However, you've noticed right now that all these tools are grayed out and I can't use them. And the reason for that is right now I still have a layer fill. So what that means is no matter what it's going to do, it's just going to fill this entire channel with this material. So everything is just flooded with red. And a way of making sure we only want to get the certain parts colored that we want is we add a mask. So it's basically how an alpha channel works in Photoshop. So black it excludes, white it includes. So we're just going to add a flat black mask to that, and now you can see that the red mask is gone completely. So if we turn this off, you'll see that there's no other texture being applied. So in other words, a way of adding back in that button now is we do the polygon selection brush. You'll see this brings up a really handy wireframe, so it will actually just let me select the parts that I want, and right here we want to make sure our color is set to white, and that's basically what it's adding to the mask. So if we set it back down to black, it's going to get rid of it. If we set it somewhere in between, it's going to be as if you had a semi-transparent alpha at that point, and it's going to make it kind of in between, but we just want it to be bright red, so we're going to set that all the way back up. And then just so we can see it, we're going to go back to the brush view, and we now have a shiny red button. So this method is pretty good if you're doing a uniform base material. So let's say we want to make all the, like, not necessarily accessories, but switches and buttons and stuff red, and keep the base material black. We can do that. So I'm just gonna go over here, and we don't have to stay in the 3D view. We can go over here to the 2D view. The 2D view is just a touch harder to navigate, so I just prefer doing it in 3D, but this is a lot faster. So we'll just go over here to the button UVs, and you'll notice I accidentally selected that part. I don't want to, so we'll just switch back to black, and it just erases it. So looks like all the buttons. You can hit F to recenter and fill everything again. Oh, there's a button I missed. I had the wrong one selected. Okay, now if we go back to our 3D view, switch to the brush so we can actually see what we did. And we now have 5 red buttons. So yeah, that's basically how you can do a material fill, and it's similar to doing an ID color channel. So if you actually already have one of those set up before you bring in the model, you could actually use that to create the alpha essentially, and the layer mask to sorry. To section off what materials. So let's say you wanted the handle specifically to be plastic, you wanted these switches to be plastic, you wanted the dials to be plastic, then you could just pull it from your ID color map and just apply that to a plastic material, and then you would have your plastic done. So that's the basics of just getting in your material fill. So we're gonna pretend that I've already done that to this model. And now let's get into actual painting on top of stuff. So we want to go to the brush tool here, and let's see, what do we want to do? Let's do some weathering. So we're going to take a base steel again, because steel is a very handy material because you can do a lot with it, just because it does have access to these four, and then there's also like different settings. So let's say you want some really scuffed up, dirty steel, and you want it to be rusty as heck, pocked up. This thing's like beaten, and you know, very little shine. So you'll see right now this is a fill layer. We don't want that, so we're just going to delete it. We have this empty layer here, and then we're just going to select steel as our material, and it's going to pull up over here. Right here you can see our brush properties next to our material properties. It's going to pull the material right here, so we can see a little preview, kind of like the hypershade, and then we're going to want to dial back in those settings. So something really scuffed up like that. Yeah. So now that we have that, I am using a pen now. So the pens in Substance Painter work as you would expect them to. They're pressure sensitive and all that fun stuff. So, you know, anyway. So you'll see I just switched to physical paint. What physical paint is, and one of the cool features of Substance Painter, I touched upon briefly earlier, is it can do particle simulations, and it can essentially fake having how real materials would be treated. And that's why Substance Painter is actually really cool for hard surface modeling, is because, you know, back in the olden days you would have to like draw in like sand, scratches, and rust and all that stuff. But if you get a particle brush where, you know, let's actually simulate a sandstorm and see, you know, what that is going to do to the model. And basically what I'm doing right now is just moving my pen back and forth, and that controls the particles. So you can see there's just like light scratching over it. Nothing, you know, too intense. It does give that procedural look. So honestly, I tend to use these very, very sparingly, and when they do, I like to turn down the intensity just so they don't look so pasted on, because it really sometimes does have that effect. So easy way of doing that is you just go to overlay, and or not overlay. What is it? Anyway, sorry, I got distracted. Shit. Okay, so the reason why it's not disappearing is right now, I've forgot it. I forgot about this part. I'm only on the base color channel, so when I reduce this to 0, you've noticed that it's only draining out the color right now. It's going from brown to just clear. So we want to switch to the height channel, and then we're going to bring that down a pretty decent amount so it's not just like sticking out completely. And then we're going to up the base color a little bit. Go to the roughness, bring that down so it only looks slightly weathered. Now you can see that it looks like it's a surface material rather than just caked on it kind of thing. Yeah, so, and then each of these modifiers also applies to the different channel that you're working on. So I don't really use the opacity or the blend modes too much that are different. Like I don't see why you would put, for example, a multiply on the base color if you're going to use you know, darken on the height. Like usually they just go hand in hand. It's easier to work that way and keeps your brain organized. So that's some basic discoloration stuff. So you'll notice on the original model there was a bunch of height map, and you might be wondering how I got that without a high poly or any sculpting, and it's actually really easy to add in Substance Painter. So if I want to do a really quick workflow on something that's like super simple like this, for example, the asset that this the game that this asset is created for is going to be a very zoomed out top down kind of deal. So even the current 2K texture map is still pretty high for what it's eventually going to be used as. So what we're going to want to do is for a basic normal bump map, whatever, you just add a new layer, and then you don't want to make it a fill layer, because if you make it a fill layer, then you're going to have just this normal applied to everywhere. We're going to want to switch the brush back to a paintbrush, or not a physical paint. And then let's go to our material here. And what we can do, which is really cool, is just shut off the color, the roughness, and the metallic. And right now what this is going to do is it's just going to give us height info only. So if I take my pen here and I start, whee, then you'll see that right now it's just raising it. And for some purposes that's good. I tend to leave on the roughness just because it does affect how, you know, the lighting will play with that. So, you know, let's say we want to add some surface detailing like scalloping or whatever. We can just drag that across and it will look like there's a bunch of ridges in this now. And yeah, so it should be of note that the material that you selected will have different roughness and height maps default. That's why I like steel. It's pretty basic. There's not much to it unless you really crank it up. So I'm gonna go back to steel and just switch back to height and roughness. And you'll notice right now that our previous material that we painted on there is still there. Whereas if we compare it to, for example, this layer, this fill layer, if we do switch the material, it's going to switch the entire painted section, because it is a fill layer. It's just going to take whatever material that is and then fill the entire canvas with it. So that's one of the handy things about paint layers versus fill layers, is that it does allow us to put multiple materials on different channels. And you might be wondering why, you know, you have so many channels, and why don't you just like paint everything direct like you would in Photoshop, where everything just gets like, you know, flattened out. And you know, for example, if you want to do some edge distressing, you can use layer effects for that, and it's just really handy. So let's throw in another steel one, but let's say we only want distressed edges for this one. So we're gonna go to the layer, right click, add a generator, and it's gonna bring up the list of generators. Sorry, delete this. It's gonna bring up the generators here, and these are the default ones it comes with. You can get more online. There's a giant community behind it. Another super cool thing for Substance Painter. So I like using the edge damages. It's generally the cleanest one I've found when it comes to edge distressing. And I say that, and now it's not doing that. It's probably because I don't have a proper normal map. No, I'm not sure why it's doing that. See if I can find a different... Huh. Okay, well, that was a bad example. Anyway, so when it comes to generators, you generally have to have good maps. I'm going to bake this out once more and see if that will help fix it. That did something. So let's just see if the generators are working now. This might have been no. So it looks like there's just something wrong right now with how it's applying the normals. This might be a Substance Painter issue. This might be an issue on my end. Yeah, we're gonna delete that effect. But so let's say we just want to manually do that edge detailing. So let's change our brush here, and Substance Painter will come with a number of brushes. They work exactly like Photoshop brushes. You just select one, and then you can resize it and just start painting on. So it'll give that weathered, distressed look on the edges. I generally like the dirt brush. It works pretty well for distressing stuff, and you'll see now that there is that kind of distressing. And let's say we don't actually like that. Handy thing with the layers, you can just shut it off or just delete it, or you can just start tweaking the layer settings as I did with the previous channel. And yeah, so let's do some basic normal map painting right now. We have our brush set up, so you can just start doing stuff. So one of the handy features is if you just hold shift, you can just draw straight lines, and it will just pick it up from the previous place that you put the brush down. And then in order to snap it to I think it's 10-degree increment, you can hold control as well. And yeah, so let's say we like those ridges, but we just want to even them out a bit. What we can do really easily is just go here to our parameters, and then we can push our channels, no, our parameters. And then we can push back down our height and select here. Important thing to note is when you are working in the view and you're trying to use the shift and control snaps, the control snaps actually work towards the camera. They are not object oriented, so you'll notice if I try to get a nice like 15-degree thing here, it won't do that. It will just snap it to where the camera is. So generally you just want to try to focus and straighten it there, or just do it by hand. So yeah, something like that. And yeah, so that is the basics of Substance Painter, and you know, if you just play around with it, you'll get stuff that you like. There's a bunch of many different things you can do. This is very cursory, introductory look at it. I'll pull up this thing originally looked like again. You saw the base mesh. This was all done in Substance Painter just to play with the settings. My only real critique of this program so far is actually that it doesn't have any way of natively handling text. The only real way I've found to do that is to use a projection map and bring in an externally made piece of text and then project it over, which is a different lesson. It's totally awful. And I would just do text in Photoshop after you've already baked out the alpha, or baked out the textures from the program. So to get into how we do that, what we're going to do is we just go to File, Export Textures, and then it will pull up, where you want it, File, Format, and then the default. So there's PBR Metal, Rough, which is, generally what you would use for something like Marmoset. CryEngine 3, self-explanatory. PBR also works for Unreal, which I just generally use PBR. So one of the really cool things about Substance Painter when it comes to this part of the pipeline is that you can dynamically change how big the texture will be. So let's say you like working in 4K because it gives you a lot of visual fidelity. You can just on the fly just kick it back down to, like, let's say 512 because you're doing a game optimized mesh. So, like, as I said before, when it's going to be something like this, 512 is perfectly fine. Whereas, if it's going to be a more AAA kind of fancy game, kicking it back up to 2K will still preserve all that info. And you can even kick it to 4K if you want some more detail. So, that being said, if you do start in 1K and then you do a bunch of beautiful texturing, whatever, and then kick it up to 4K, it won't inject more detail. It, it can only do so much. It will preserve it if you started at 4K and went to 1K, but it won't upscale it and make it look better. Like, at common sense, it just can't do that. But, yeah. So, that's Substance Painter. Thank you.